This is the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel. Today is Friday, September the 26th. My name is Neil Saravaнаmutu. I am joined by John Willing and Joanne Chianello. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hey, Neil. Hi, Joanne.
Okay, listen, I want to just start off the top here. The three of us, we're sounding great. We've had a few audio issues in the past week or two. We hope we've got those resolved. So if anyone is still noticing them, please let us know, as I'm sure you will. But we are going to jump straight into it, hopefully with improved audio. So our first topic today, and actually there's been a lot that's gone on in the last week.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yes. First topic is return to office. Now, we talked about this
Are
a
they
little
returning? Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. Well, listen, we talked about this a bit last week, and Jeff Leeper had put forward this motion, or was going to put forward this motion for discussion. And we were wondering, how could any councillor vote against this? And John, I think you nailed it when you said there will be some procedural trick to get around this. So, John, tell us what actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think any of us could have predicted this, that there would be another motion or amended motion, but we did get Canada Councillor Kathy Curry come to the table with a motion that basically said that, and it was adopted with a 15-10 vote, that the city manager has the call on this, and should go ahead and manage her workforce. Wendy Stephenson, the city manager, manage her workforce as she sees fit, and make hybrid arrangements as required, and pretty much empowering the city manager to make those calls. And I'm sure the city manager will empower her managers to make those calls too, on a department by department basis. So all that build up for really a fizzle, although there was a pretty good debate around the council table, wasn't there, Joanne and Neil?
For like more than 2 hours, right?
Yeah. And rightfully so, because as we've talked about on the pod, this is a big issue, not just for the municipality, but for the city as a whole. But here we are with a new motion, and essentially empowering the city manager to make a call on basically workforce management.
Yeah. So, and John, my interpretation is that this is essentially just going back to, let's call it 2019, right? That is, these processes were in place before, and now we're just returning to them. Joanne, you think it's different?
Well, I don't know if it's technically different, but I think there was a lot of discussion that made it sound like it's somewhat different, right? We had Councillor Jessica Bradley bring forward some, friendly amendments to Kathy Curry's so-called replacement motion. So what happens is, because people voted for Kathy Curry's motion, then no one ever voted for Jeff Leeper's motion, right? Like, it never came to the floor, so it has kind of canceled. And Jessica Bradley's amendments kind of made it clear that hybrid work would be accommodated, right? And so it was so complicated and confusing. I'm with Catherine Kitts, East End councillor, who said at one point, I don't really know what the policy is. And I agree with that, because on the one hand, it's supposed to be, okay, everyone back to work 5 days a week. By the way, it's only affecting about 1,000 people, because 85% of the employees do not work behind a desk, right? They are out in the community providing services. There's another like 7% of people who are already working 5 days a week anyway. And so this only left like 7 or 8% of the workforce left. And so they're like, okay, so what's happening with these people? And now what we're hearing is, well, it's up to the managers. If, any reasonable thing might be accommodated, you don't necessarily have to work in the office 5 days a week. And you're thinking, okay, well then, what kind of policy is that? I mean, is it just up to your manager or whatever? So it was a very confusing, I thought it was a little bit complicated, not clear what the purpose of this policy was or how it would work. And I think a lot of people don't know, because it's happening in January 1st. And I also heard a couple councillors talk about how they really support hybrid work, including Councillor Matthew Luloff, who was actually at the council meeting from his, home office that looks like a little radio studio out in Orleans, right? And he actually is like, I often don't come in. I got childcare issues. I have other issues that a lot of my constituents do too. But even though they obviously did not really agree with 5 days a week, they still voted for the motion. So it was actually procedural schmozzle, I thought.
Yeah. Okay. And John, the mayor went to great lengths to say that council should not be making HR decisions. It's not the appropriate place. That's the responsibility of the city manager. Is that a fair statement by the mayor, or is this an appropriate issue where the delegation of authority to the city manager should be looked at by council more closely?
Well, I think you have to have trust in your city manager to manage their workforce, and I think if you don't empower your city manager, your chief administrative officer for the municipality, I mean, it could say something about how easy or hard you might have to find a new city manager one day. You know, when Wendy retires or whatever her future plans are, and so you have to have some loyalty, or you have to have some trust in your city manager to manage a large, one of the biggest workforces, right, in the city. So is it appropriate? Yeah, you know what? But I do think it's a vibe vote. Like I said last pod, it's a vibe vote in that it's a sentiment, a proclamation about how our city councilors feel about work from home policies and return to office in general, because the trickle down impact to municipal infrastructure is massive from the roads to the transit. So I think city council weighing in on return to office protocols in general is important. But I do think like the city manager has to be empowered to make these decisions about how her workers are gonna carry out their jobs across the corporation. So I mean, look, it was a good debate to have because I think I think it's the biggest issue in the city, return to office, no matter where you work,
Yeah.
whether it's for city hall or federal government or the private sector. But really, the city manager has to have the power to manage a workforce.
Okay. Joanne, I want to ask you about some of the procedural issues that happened here. And Councillor Menard referred to this replacement motion as the shenanigans that we experienced under the Watson council. So is that like a fair assessment here? Like, this replacement motion came out of nowhere, and it was really one interpretation is that it was designed to diffuse having to have a real debate and have people put their, declare where they actually stand on this return to office. Do you think we're going back to the battle days?
Well, I mean, these procedures exist, right? And you always need to know that they might be used. And I think actually Councillor Jeff Leeper, who put that original motion in, he was expecting that something like this might happen. However, this council has gotten along better, than the previous council up till now. And one thing that Menard said, which I think is valid, and that is, this motion has just been brought here without any notice. Like,
Yeah.
Jeff Leeper did not walk his motion on. He gave a notice of motion 2 weeks ago. It was not circulated to councillors even before the meeting, right? Like literally saw it when we saw it up on the screen watching at home. That is when council saw it. In fact, had to ask council, Sean Menard asked for a 10-minute recess so they could read it and figure out what does this mean to the motion that's on the table, and it was granted. So in that sense, yes, a little bit of a return to the embattled days, right? But I mean, they're allowed, right? It's one of those things. It's not really
Sure.
dirty politics. I mean, John predicted it last week. Like he knows what's going to happen.
Welcome to municipal politics. I mean, Sean Menard, Jeff Leeper, they are experienced municipal politicians now at this point. They know exactly how things work around the council table. They probably, as Joanne said, probably predicted a walk-on motion would happen at some point to change the direction of the Leeper motion. And so it takes a lot of discussions before the council meeting with their colleagues. I mean, the one thing that the mayor has an advantage of is a direct link to the city manager, the city clerk's office. I think the city clerk's office is still right below the mayor's office, right, at City Hall. And so, there's communications happening right up to the council meeting, but like someone like Councillor Menard, Councillor Leeper, they know about all this already.
Yeah.
And remember
but if you
also,
want to keep up, if you want to keep up, sorry to interrupt, John, but if you want to keep up the idea that, well, this council is different and we collaborate, you could actually give a heads up, like we're bringing out a motion soon and you'll see it, right? I mean, fine, they don't have to do that, and that's politics. But I'm just saying, you can't, like, you're not going to be able to keep both narratives going, right? If it goes in this direction where you're like, well, this is a different kind of council, and also here's a killer motion that's going to kill your motion, right? So that we didn't tell you about, like, literally not even before the meeting. So.
Well, yeah. I'll just say this one more thing. Like the first Jim Watson term, right, was a different kind of council from the Larry O'Brien council. And then and then things started to change. It was the get along gang, as the late Sue Sharing, I think, once called once called them, and then things changed quickly
Mm,
towards the end of the term and into the new term. So maybe this is a
Okay.
point.
yeah.
We don't know. We're gonna find out.
Oh, that's a good point.
Lansdowne, the budget, right? We have these big votes coming
Hinge
up.
moment.
Yeah, maybe a change.
Council hinge moment.
Well, John, I want to ask you about a point that Joanne raised, which is okay. So first of all, it was a 15-10 vote, 15 councillors in favor of this motion. But of those 15, I believe there were 4 of them that were actually working remotely at the time. Okay, we talked about Matthew Luloff. I believe it was the same thing for Alan Hubley, Tim Tierney, and Stephanie Plant. From what I could tell, I wasn't in the room at the time, but watching it on Zoom afterwards. Is that not like a bit, I don't know, like ironic that people would be voting to force work, well, to bring workers back to the office from a remote location? And just to clarify, what do we think about whether this actually applies to councillors themselves?
Look, they're their own bosses. That's the funny thing about council, right? Their only bosses are the taxpayers, the voters. They don't report to anyone else. They don't report to the mayor, so they can do whatever they want, however they want to like appear at council. I found the Matt Luloff. I think he talked about. I saw some reporting saying he had eye affection or something like that. That's why he couldn't come. But he also talked about through the reporting I read, like he does run into childcare challenges, like so many other families do.
Yeah, he talked
And
about that.
yeah, and so I'm wondering, like, I'm kind of wondering what the rest of the city, the bureaucracy, like how that's going to play into decisions managers are going to make about who gets to do hybrid work and who doesn't. And so I want to see that kind of leadership around council of someone saying, look, I run into childcare problems just like many other families, and many of those families work right in the municipal government, I'm sure. So I'm curious to see how those conversations play out. But I mean, will these councillors show up now in person at council, or will they continue to,
I don't think Councillor Luloff has come to one committee meeting in person. He's been to council in person, but I don't know. Like and he's not the only one. I don't want to,
Okay,
raise
Joanne, I want last word on this. Does the RTO debate end here?
Oh, no. Oh, no. You already have unions complaining. Councillors told me that they have never gotten so much email from people. They're getting emailed from employees like directly in the city, like using city emails, phoning them, using their personal emails. Like they are really upset. They don't know what's going on. And I think we're going to start to hear things like, we've all worked places where like a manager has favorites, or, you got a good manager or you got a crummy manager. And so now it's going to be, is my hybrid work request is it at the whim of is my boss a jerk or not, right? Like, if you have a family, you get to work from home because you have childcare issues, but if you don't have a family, you don't. I would also like to say we're going to talk about the housing acceleration task force report, but we heard that part of the complaints were that development applications were getting held up. Something that the city auditor also confirmed recently, that they're taking too long, that people are having trouble getting meetings in the planning department and getting their files, like getting calls back. If you have a problem in a department, then you got to deal with that problem. And we should say the planning department has not had a general manager for 3 years, until a couple of months ago. So, returning everyone back to work does not change the culture. I actually really love working in person, but I see the value of how that works. And so, no, it doesn't start till January 1st. We got 3.5 months left to this. And I think we're going to hear lots more about it.
Yeah, I think we will hear a lot more about it over the right up to the election. So let's move to topic number 2, which is speed cameras. And there had been rumors of this last week, and just a day or two ago, the Premier Doug Ford, made it official that he plans to introduce legislation into the provincial parliament to ban speed cameras in Ontario. Now, he has also said that he would provide some funding to municipalities to put up new signs. I think his idea is that in school zones you'd have those speed boards that tell you how fast you're going, or have flashing lights that would tell people to slow down. And this is going to solve the question. So I tell you what, Joanne, I know I can see you've got thoughts on this, but I'm going to give John the first word on this.
All right.
Well, I wrongfully predicted this would go away on the last pod, guys. I thought for sure this would blow over, but then I think the premier came out firing and like bringing on the hammer. I'm shocked he went that direction, just based on the intel he was getting from some mayors, including, I think Mark Sutcliffe, but also from the police chiefs in the province too, suggesting that the photo radar has actually been a helpful tool. But the premier likes speed bumps better than photo radar, so I guess we'll see more speed bumps pop up. And I'll tell you what, speed humps and speed bumps are kind of controversial in neighborhoods as well. And so there's no great tool, but I think I thought photo radar was something that was palatable by a lot of municipalities. So I'm surprised the premier going this way.
Yeah. How about you, John? What's your take?
Yeah. Well, sorry. I just saying I had a little cough, so I just blacked out my camera so I could drink some water. I don't think our viewers need to see that. I am furious. I know I am kind of a hothead, so I'm always blowing my top. But this case, I really mean it. Like, it is so irresponsible. It flies in the face of evidence that speed cameras work. They slow down drivers, and that he would just get rid of this because some hooligans in Toronto are cutting down speed cameras there is basically rewarding vandals, and one of the worst populist moves I've ever seen. The provincial government is going against that crazy leftist society, Ontario police chiefs. They actually want them. They said no. And also, and I use this word advisedly, we hear the premier lying. He's lied that this money doesn't go into road safety. Not true. Most of the money in Ottawa goes into road safety here that we get from speed cameras. It doesn't, there's no evidence that it slows down traffic. Also not true. Everything true. You're getting a ticket for going a couple kilometers over the speed limit. Not true. And I know John's going to tell us a little about that. So I think it's like, I don't know, maybe there's community where it's unpopular, but I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of people push back. It's going to cost us a lot of money. Like, we're going to have, as a city, we're going to have to take down the speed cameras. That's a problem. Also, this idea that the government's going to give us some funding for road safety measures, you can guarantee that will be woefully, woefully inadequate, as is every other fund that they give municipalities to, do stuff like infrastructure or whatever. Also, you can't use speed bumps on Ontario Road. When you go over a speed bump, it's to bring you down to 30 kilometers an hour. But it doesn't stop you from going 80 on a 50 road. You know what I mean? Which is what happens. So councillors will tell you every time, in pretty much every city, I think, but certainly Ottawa, their number one complaint is people speeding through their neighborhoods. And this was a great way to both address that and also to fund other measures. And this premier doesn't care about that. And so it's one of the worst decisions he's ever made, in my view.
Yeah. And if I understand correctly, the majority of people in Ontario actually approve of speed cameras. I believe that's the data. But John, I want to come back to the money question, because the premier said
they don't vote conservative, those people.
Okay.
I don't know.
So the premier said he'll make some money available. Probably, we don't know how much yet, but we do know to previous discussion that the city of Ottawa nets about $30 million a year in revenue from these cameras. So that's going to leave a pretty big hole in our budget. Do we expect the province to fill that hole?
No. I mean, I don't expect us to get 30
Nobody expects that.
No. But I'm curious. A couple things, and Joanne kind of alluded to this too. There was some reporting after the premier made his announcement this week about, like, what are these cameras calibrated at? And that's a question that the city has never really confirmed. Like, what point am I going to get a ticket? And I was reading a story in the Citizen, quoting Councillor Tim Tierney, who oversees a committee, who chairs the committee in charge of transportation stuff in the city. And he talked about 11 over is when the cameras are triggered to give a ticket. Mm-hmm. And I remember when the photo radar, when the cameras went up, we kept asking the city staff, say, hey, what is it calibrated at? At what point do people get tickets? And of course, rightfully, the city would never say, because of course they're not going to disclose that information, because people are
that's the new speed limit.
That's the new speed limit. And so I chuckled, and I had a little side conversation with Joanne on text saying, I can't believe, like, the numbers out there now that people know how fast you can go through a camera road.
Yeah, like Tim Tierney said, if you're going 61 in a 50 the zone, then you get a ticket, and that's speeding 11 kilometers over. And I'm like, oh, is that
Now
it?
we know.
Okay.
Now we know.
But to your point, Sean, we always thought it was about 10 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
Like, there was some leeway. Yeah.
And I am wondering, I don't know if Premier Ford is going to order the takedown of cameras, or for them just to be turned off, because governments change. It's still a
Yeah.
long ways off to the next
Yeah,
provincial
that's a good
election,
point.
right? But I do wonder if the municipalities are going to keep up the infrastructure. They paid for it and just hood them, put a hood over them or something. I don't know. But
Yeah.
have the ability to flick them back on when and if a new government is elected, say in the next election.
Right. Okay. So, Joanne, you mentioned that police chiefs across the province have come out against this idea of removing the cameras.
Yes.
Um, I mean, a big question is, if you look at the data, police have largely stopped handing out tickets for speeding because they just no longer need to because we have automated enforcement.
Well,
So,
not
what
just
is that
that. Oh, go ahead.
like?
Yeah.
Like I was going to ask, what does this do to how police allocate the resources? What does it do to police budgets?
I have to say, like, we pay police officers six-figure salaries. We give them a lot of power. You know, they carry arms. They have big jobs to do. Putting up speed traps is a stupid use of their resources. I think we should believe that as a society, and they believe it too, right? They have a lot of things. Like, you know, now you're like, oh, my car got stolen out of my driveway, and I can't even get the police to respond back to me. Okay, that's like theft of a major thing. I would rather a police is responding to that than out with a speed gun in your report, you know, or with their cruiser on a street where that might slow down traffic for 10 minutes because people see a police car. But that is not a systemic and permanent solution, right? And so, like, there's no way that police are going to start patrolling the streets for for speeding. Like, zero chance. They
Yeah.
are they have a lot of bigger problems to deal with, and that's not going to happen. So
Yeah.
it's really short sighted and really just so irresponsible. This decision, I can barely stand it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think it's going to end up going to the courts. A little bit like
You think so?
the bike. Well, a lot like the bike lanes decision. I think someone will challenge this on safety issues. And we'll see it go through the course.
Yeah.
So
It won't be.
maybe
It
it's
will
not.
not be the police chiefs, though. Like, I don't think
No,
they're
no,
going to
no,
take it.
no,
No, I
no.
know. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to topic number 3, which is the Housing Innovation Task Force. It came out last Friday. It's a significant development in city policy around housing, and the recommendations come forward. Well, actually, sorry, the policy that's come forward includes 53 recommendations that council are going to vote on. This is all about building homes faster and cheaper. So, John, I wanted to just actually start before we get into the recommendations and the report itself. I want to talk about the composition of the panel that basically came up with the ideas here. And it was a task force that included 3 large developers. So we had Taggart, Claridge, and Mattamy, 3 builders. It also included 2 public sector builders. So we had Ottawa Community Housing and we had Canada Lands, Canada Lands is kind of like part of Build Canada Homes now. And it also included 3 support service agencies. So we had Hoban Architecture, we had Foten Planning, and we had Novatech Engineering. So I want to ask you, like in this city, there are
Also,
dozens
I think
of,
there was a builders
oh,
association in there,
Boma.
BOMA.
okay,
Yeah. So
homeowners. Yeah, or sorry,
yeah,
yes, you're right. There was.
yeah.
Thank you.
One more.
Right. But you know, in this city, like every other, we've got lots of small and medium-sized builders. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on whether the recommendations that are coming forward reflect their views too, or if this is just the views of the large dominant players. And I guess the other question is, like, what about community voices? Should community voices have been part of this discussion?
Yeah, I don't know. Like the developers are the ones with the money to build the things. So I mean, we need them to get going and put shovels in the ground. I
Yeah.
think the community has voices through stuff like the official plan process. Mind you, the builders do too, and the zoning bylaw, right?
Mhm.
Mind you, the builders do too. But I think like the task force, the people on that task force have a lot of experience, many years working with municipal regulations, specific regulations with Ottawa City Hall. And so they know they're well versed on the challenges working with this city hall in particular. I don't mind the composition of the task force. You know, I've covered some of these people on the task force when I was
Yeah.
a daily reporter. Joanne certainly has too, and seen them on the regular come to the planning committee meetings and council meetings to talk about development. So
Okay.
but I think the community has had voices, just not in this process, but in other ways, like through the OP and the zoning bylaw.
Okay. Actually, I might say if there are any small or medium-sized builders that are out there that have views on this
Mhm.
on the recommendations, whether they worked for you, please let us know. But Joanna, let's turn to the details of
Sure.
the proposals that come forward, and perhaps the one that's got the most attention. The plan is to cut community benefit charges for 5 years. So, can you explain what these fees are and if
Sure.
cutting them is a good idea?
So when you build things, there's tons of fees, right? There's permit fees and development charges. We've talked about that. That is, fees that go to building infrastructure. Community development charges are different, a completely different set of fees. And they replaced something that used to be called Section 37. It was Section 37 of the Planning Act, which was kind of meant to negotiate some benefits for the community for kind of extra, I'm going to call them extra large development projects, right? Where you're looking for density that's like at least 25% more than what's allowed. And what they were finding that in Toronto, some people felt that that was being abused, right? It was like used as a tool to block development, to extort more money out of developers. Anyway, no one liked it, apparently in Toronto. I guess some people did, the people who got the money, but not the actual builders. So it was replaced in 2022 with something called community benefits charge. And it was standardized because Section 37, like, there's not, like, the formula was weird. And here they said you can charge up to 4% on like anything that's over. I'm just looking at my notes now because I want to make sure it's right. Except it's the wrong page. But like it's anything like over 5 stories and 10 units or something like that. So basically,
And,
almost anything is having now to pay 4% of the land value of that deal into community benefits. And like 4% added on to like everything else is
yeah,
actually a significant amount of money. And
okay,
so that money's being used to build, like, it's capital money to build some infrastructure. I know that Jeff Leeper has said that he has wanted it, he's used it for affordable housing, which there is some controversy on whether that's needed. Anyhow, the recommendations say give it a 5-year holiday, which is very dramatic change. And so there is some
yeah,
pushback to this. Do you want to take
yeah.
that
And
off?
so, well, yeah. Do we think it's a good idea, John? Why don't you jump in?
Well, I like it depends how much the city is really dependent on that money up until now. It's only been around, right, Joanne, for about 3 years. I think it's
2022,
been
yeah.
2022. And so I think this is going to be the one thing that's going to light a lot of debate around council when it comes. Everything else in the task force recommendations, I think that there's
Yeah,
some just agreement that there's some pretty good stuff in there. But is it a good
Mhm.
idea? I think it's something to I'll be interested in the debate because I want to know what are we going to miss out on, and same with all these other recommendations from the task force in terms of holding off on certain charges or fees being collected. Like what's the opportunity? What's the cost, right? What are we not
Mhm.
going to be able to upkeep?
yeah,
We've talked about maintenance before on the pod, but also any kind of new amenities that we'd like to have that we
yeah,
need that communities want to
Well,
have. So I want to hear that.
you can't use community benefits for maintenance, right? You have to use them for a new capital cost.
Mhm.
But what I found interesting is that, like, it's a complete holiday for 5 years. 5 years is a long time. When you go through the recommendations, I'm not sure if we're going to talk about some other ones, like things around what developers pay, for parkland, for example. Like, they're reviewing like the recommendation is to review the parkland fees, and in the meantime, like, give them a holiday or a break for 18 months. Okay, well, if you want to review the community benefits because you think it's too much, or it's being charged to too many projects or whatever, okay, fine, but like give it a holiday for like a year or 18 months, right? 5 years is too long. So, and I
Yeah.
can see a situation where it's on a sliding scale or it's lower or whatever, or, you're not going to charge it for the kinds of homes that you're trying to incentivize, like 3-bedroom
yeah.
apartments, or
Joanne,
something, right? But I mean,
yeah.
5 years is too long, I think.
Okay, Joanne, is it not also retroactive? And
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the other thing. Bizarre. I've never seen that before in my life.
yeah, because how does that incentivize housing?
Yeah.
Retroactive payments.
The
Okay.
housing that you could have built that you would have, but you are. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Listen, I suggested this is coming to council very soon. And why don't we have a second discussion about it and delve into some of the other issues in more detail because there is a ton to go through here. But I guess the one thought that I have in mind is we have to like recognize that the building industry will build when the market conditions work for them. And we are, we're going through a difficult housing market right now. We're moving into, I would argue, we're moving into one that's going to be even harder. Look, the signs point to a recession coming up, and builders will sensibly say that if market conditions are not right for
Mhm.
me, I'm going to sit out on the sidelines and wait until they are. And that's a perfectly rational behavior. I mean, it does create a issue for the city in terms of getting that supply response. So I guess the question is maybe for you, John, do you think we're going to get the supply response that we're hoping for anytime in the foreseeable future?
Well, I think you answered the question you posed, actually. Like, the builders are going to build when they're ready to build. And if it's too
Yeah.
expensive to build, they ain't going to build. Now, the fee breaks that the city is proposing and the delaying of collecting fees, I think that's going to maybe spur some developers to get some applications in, some shovels in the ground. But really, if it's still going to cost a lot to build, they're not going to do it. And so, but I think this is part of it, right, guys? I think the municipality has a role to play. They're doing the
Mhm.
job of figuring out some proposals to bring to council, and so they have a role to play. And so, the municipality and, Mayor Sutcliffe and the rest of the council can say we're doing our part, and maybe the builders can be convinced to start putting shovels in the ground sooner than later, right?
Okay. Let's move on to topic
All right.
number 4. And Joanne, we will come back to this topic once council has a chance
Sure.
to weigh in on it.
Mhm.
Topic number 4 is the Supreme Court has refused to hear the city's appeal of a Canada golf course conversion. Okay, so many of you will remember that there is a golf course owned by ClubLink in Canada. It was originally the original agreement in 1981 between the then developer and then City of Canada was that this would be Greenland forever. This would be saved as green space forever. Now, when the property was sold to ClubLink has now come forward and said, or had come forward and said, we want to build homes on this. And there's been a lengthy legal dispute between the city and the golf course. The courts have have consistently ruled on the side of the golf course that developing these lands is completely permissible. That those old contracts, the original contracts, are just no longer enforceable. So, Joanne, why don't you get us started off and say, should the city be continuing to fight ClubLink on this? Because the city have actually said that if we're at the end of our legal challenges, we're going to use every procedural and
Yeah.
approval mechanism we have at our disposal to stop this. So, should the city keep fighting, or should they say, we lost, and you win some, you lose some?
All right. First, I'm going to say, no, that's insane. But let me just go back and say, I believe the lowest court decision was kind of a mixed decision. I don't think it was like
Okay.
100% no. And then the Court of Appeal said, don't be ridiculous. The idea being you can't force future owners to keep on the conditions that like a previous owner did decades ago. Like the concept of perpetuity doesn't really exist in law. And I remember, John, when council was deciding like whether to go to the Supreme Court, and we were all like, are you kidding me with the Supreme Court appeal? They don't have time. Like, I don't think the decision that the Supreme Court is not hearing this, I think, has surprised no one. And I remember council, I'd like to know how much this cost, because at the time, council authorized up to $100,000 in legal fees to bring this to the Supreme Court. So I don't know what they actually spent.
Yeah.
And I can understand the people in Canada are very upset, especially the people who probably spent additional money, paying premiums for their homes to back onto a golf course, and that was used, by the community in the winter. Sure, but their dispute is with the landowner. I'm not sure, what the city can do. And here I live in Kitchissippi, where people are getting buildings built right next to them, next to their 2-story house all the time. So, I don't know how much, about how much sympathy like other neighborhoods have for that area. But let me just go around to your original question. And that is that Mayor Mark Sutcliffe put on Twitter, or X, whatever we call it now, said, really disappointed with this decision to not go to the Supreme Court. We support the people of Canada, but they believe me that the developers still need approvals here. and they need easements and they need water, and we are going to use everything in our power to stop that. And I think John and I were talking about this earlier, and like, oh, that's the outlaw, that's the inside part. You're not supposed to say out loud. Like, it just seems insane you would say that. It seems like it's just a carte blanche for the developers, who I think in this case are Minto and Richcrafts, to basically sue you. Now,
Yeah.
is there a question about what the water infrastructure is there? Yes, there is, and of course that should be done responsibly and all of that. But to say like, oh, we have a lot, like we're going to basically use city process to hold this up, like at the same time that you have this housing accelerator incentive report with the 90 million recommendations to make it easier for developers to develop, except at Club Links, where we're going to do everything in our power to stop it from happening. I just found it really shocking. Again, on the political side of things, I find it it's a little tone deaf to me.
Okay. Well, John, can you reconcile that difference between we've got this housing task force, we need to build more homes, but not right here?
Yeah, I mean, when Club Link came public with what they want to do with the golf course, this is kind of before the housing crisis, right? When it started ramping up. Now we're in a totally different conversation. I love Joanne's like juxtaposition about the task force and all these proposals about building more homes. And here's this big swath of green area that could be a new subdivision inside Canada. But like Joanne, I do feel bad for the people who bought homes there with a nice fairway vista in their backyard. And it's going to be completely different. God knows how long from now. But I was thinking also back to the Glen Abbey example down in Southern Ontario, and how Club Link was proposing to build over that historic golf course too, and the province stepped in and said no. And last week when Premier Ford was asked if the province was going to step into this case in Canada, he said no. This is the municipality's issue, and so they're not doing it.
And
he
has said no before. People have asked him that before, and they have said no. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think it's like apples and oranges necessarily. Because Glen Abbey is a historic golf course designed by Jack Nicklaus, et cetera, et cetera. And so, not to say the Canada golf course isn't nice and great, because it is nice and great. But now the city is going to have to think about
the PGA finals aren't actually played there or things like that.
No, the Canadian Open has been playing at Glen Abbey many
exactly.
times, and so now it's up to the city to work with the developers to make sure that's a great infill community for the rest of the community as well. And so it comes down to neighborhood design, and so there's going to be a process with the municipality. I'm not surprised the Supreme Court wouldn't hear the
Okay. I have to say that this is an issue where I'm fairly sympathetic to the mayor, actually, because I would like to think that a deal is a deal. We had this contract and people bought these homes in good faith. They assumed that some sort of legal agreement between a landowner and the city was worth more than a couple of decades worth of commitment. So I have a lot of sympathy for the residents that are there. I have sympathy for the mayor on this one too. Which I don't on every issue. But it does actually make me...
But once 3 courts have come in and said no, isn't it time to move on? We fought the good fight. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah. Well, you know what? This is a segue into the next topic that I want to talk about, which is coming back to Lansdowne very quickly. And that's that we are proposing a sort of similar structure with Lansdowne, right? Like the idea is that with Club Link, there was a covenant in the contract to bind how the land was used in the future, that this would be green space forever. We're doing something similar with Lansdowne. The proposal is that there's Exhibition Way right in the middle of the site. We're going to sell it to a developer, let them build the podium and then the towers on top of it. And once they're finished building, then we have the option to buy it back from them. Of course, the same risk that we've just been talking about with Canada could apply to Lansdowne here. So I'm a bit surprised that hasn't become more of a live discussion at City Hall about the risks that we're taking on with Lansdowne. So can I use that as a segue into...
That is the clumsiest segue I have ever heard. But okay, go. Yes.
Okay. So, John, I'm going to start with you. Interestingly, the mayor was escorting the premier around Lansdowne Park this past week. So I can only assume that he was there to advocate for the province providing additional fund or providing funding to support the Lansdowne project. If that's in fact the case, do you think the Premier is going to take him up on this?
Well, it'd be a little bit of a Hail Mary if you ask me. I couldn't help it. I couldn't help using a football pun in this. But I mean, I
So many
think
sports analogies.
I think no harm in asking. The province does have a fund for like community recreation infrastructure. The Premier was in Eastern Ontario, not just in Ottawa. He gave $10 million for a project out in Renfrew, right, for a new recreation facility. So there is a fund available to create recreation facilities. And so I'm thinking about, of course, the recreation facility the city is proposing to build to replace the Civic Center. So yeah, maybe the mayor did ask for some money while the Premier was in town. Whether the province agrees to give the city money for like a P3 type project, not quite sure about that.
Yeah. And it's not just like, oh, it doesn't hurt to ask. Like, isn't there like 20 to 50 million dollars, or like there is a chunk set aside
20.
in the actual financial plan that says
Yes.
this money will come from higher levels of government? Well, if
Yeah.
it doesn't come, where is it coming from, right? So there is a question there.
Coming from
for
your
sure.
pocket, Joanne.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Well, no, seriously, you're right. There's 20 million has been earmarked in the proposal to come from higher levels of government. If that money doesn't come through, then it's just got to fall back to the taxpayer. Joanne, there has been, I would say, like, we haven't heard a lot from City Hall on this file recently, and I find it a bit unusual because the original plan was that this was going to come to council in October. The latest that I've been hearing is that it's been punted to November. So I'd like to get your take on what do you think is going on here? Do you think the mayor is having any sort of issues rustling up the votes?
Oh, you're wishful thinking. No, I don't know. I don't know about that part of it, but I do disagree a little with you that it's unusual. I don't think it is. It's a very complicated file. When it comes, then we'll look at it. But I did, do some asking around after you mentioned that, and it just seems like it's just delayed. Like it's not finished. It's a very complicated report. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's what can I say? An outside expert helping to write it who's not available. So it's just that kind of delay. And I think we've seen that before with big complex problems, like, over the years that John and I have covered City Hall. So I don't think it's too weird yet. But I mean, if it keeps going on, if it's punted into next year and then it's election year, I think then that would be odd. But I don't think I don't think there's anything nefarious at this point.
Okay.
Or maybe they're waiting to get the provincial money. Like maybe they're trying to figure out if they'll get that.
Yeah, actually, John, what's your take on timing? Because as Joanne mentioned, so first of all, if we push it into November, we're into budget season, and so you're looking at budget versus Lansdowne, and people are like, "Are we connecting these two dots here?" You push it into next year, you're starting to get into the whole election cycle. So,
well, and I think about I'm not one to look out for councillors and their workload, but like you get into the budget and you get into Lansdowne, which two big municipal policy issues, money issues that are kind of come to their agenda maybe around the same time. And so that's a lot for councillors to handle and deal with and consult with their constituents on both the budget and Lansdowne. And so that's my concern, is that you're going to kind of suck a thick milkshake through a thin straw with all the municipal policies that are going to come through right maybe in December.
And John, you'll remember back, we were both covering council 2012, Lansdowne and the LRT, the original LRT contract at the same time. It was a nightmare. It was terrible. And I also think that things fell through the cracks, right? Because people cannot absorb that many details about that many things. So that's a problem.
Okay. We have one last point to cover, and Joanne, I'm going to turn to you for this. So there was a CBC story earlier in the week that said the mayor of Ottawa had used his strong powers 81 times. Now, Mayor Sutcliffe, after council, in fact, before council and after council, came out very clearly and said, "I have not used my strong mayor powers in any meaningful way." So, can you set the record straight here? What's going on?
So first of all, I'd like to say that was not a CBC Ottawa story. It came out of Windsor. And again, the reporters on the former reporters on this panel will know very well how people, when they're unhappy about being quoted in a story that I was saying, oh, what I said was taken completely out of context. But in this case, I have to say, the mayor's actions were taken completely out of context, and that story was 100% unfair to him. Now, he was also not really what I know what he meant, but in fact, he has used the strong mayor powers 81 times. And where you see that is it is posted on the website. Like, as part of the strong mayor powers, part of that law is that you have to have publicly available the many times that you've used it. Here's what he's used it for. He has the authority that he cannot delegate to sign off on bylaws that council has approved. Like, council voted on them in the normal way. He's the one who has to sign those. Like, he doesn't have a choice. And in a few instances, he was also delegating his strong mayor power back to council. That was also on there. And so, like, he hasn't used it in any way. And so to say he used it 81 times, if you're not following or you don't know the laws, you're thinking, oh, he's used his powers to, overstep what council wanted. No, not one single time. And so I was really upset at that story. I don't want to be one of those like old former reporters who are like, oh, reporting is not as good anymore. But I mean, this is a reporter who I don't think is a normal reporter of municipal affairs and understands the policy. And so you heard Mayor Olivia Chow from Toronto also got caught up in the same contextual issue, and she pushed back. So the mayor has not used his strong powers in any way to override the will of council, and he's pretty good on that stuff. So like you, I don't always agree with the mayor, so I want to say 100% I'm behind him on this. That was really unfair to him.
Okay. Joanne, thank you for setting the record straight. That is it for this week. Please leave us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and we will do our best to get back to them in the next recording. We will be back next week. Until then, I'd like to thank John and Joanne. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. This has been the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel.